Welcome back to the content section of the site. Thank you for accessing this video. This is essentially going to be installment number 1 of the post-launch content. So we're looking at sort of episode 4, I think, on the site now, and today we're going to touch on when to deload. Note this is very different to how to deload. We're not really going to touch on how to structure your deload in terms of do you train or not, how do you structure nutrition, what should you consider doing additionally in a deload phase, etc, etc. We're going to touch more on the mental, physical cues of, okay, am I ready to deload? Do I need to deload, or am I okay? And so that's what we're going to touch on more today. So if you train hard and you go into the gym with clear intentions, you train hard with a long-term goal in mind, you have the desire to achieve it, and you're actually working hard, you're going to need a deload at some point. If you go into the gym, you do a bunch of junk volume with no real purpose, at low intensity, and you don't train hard, then you can probably get away without a deload. So what is a deload? A common misconception is that it's just a week off or a period of time where you could just disregard variables, and that couldn't be further from the truth. A deload, to me, is just as important as any other programmed week where you're in the gym training hard. Although you may not necessarily be looking to beat your logbook numbers, you are looking to mitigate fatigue. And so to do that adequately, you still have to continue to monitor your variables. Sure, you might want to bring your training day food down to rest day, and you might want to bring your training down to 50% volume or completely zero, and I'll touch a little bit on that again, more so in the how to video. With the deload, we're sort of taking one step back to then go on and be able to take 2, 3, 4 steps forward. And so you shouldn't view a deload as sort of a period of time where you're just wasting time or just not progressing, because although you're directly not progressing in terms of physical numbers in the logbook, you're indirectly allowing for a greater rate of progression in the subsequent sessions and weeks to come post deload. So when you look at it with that mindset, it's an incredibly important aspect of any training program and should never be ignored. We need to come away from the week with an improvement, like we would in any other week. You need to beat a logbook number, or you need to, get a new heavy weigh-in, or if you're in a fat loss phase, get a new low weigh-in or see a new vein or whatever it is. In the deload, it's the same. We need to come away with improvements. So we want to mitigate our skeletal fatigue, mitigate our muscular fatigue, improve the sort of mental approach, so allow stress to come back down, be more controlled, give us time to improve our digestion, maybe time to get out and do more walks, up your expenditure, build a better response to insulin. There's an abundance of things that we can look at here, but the point is, in one way or another, we need to come away with a progression in the week that we otherwise may not have had if we had just wiped out all the variables, which is what a lot of people do on a deload. As I say, I'm not really going to touch on sort of whether or not you should train. This is a common argument that we can go back and forth on in terms of whether the benefits of continuing to train at a lighter volume or intensity, or not training at all. I'm more favoured towards this one, sneak peek, but we'll touch on that and how to structure your nutrition and all that sort of good stuff within the how to deload video come in at some point soon. I couldn't give you a date. It's backlogged for the content section of the site, so at some point soon it will come. Equally, if you're interested in learning how to structure your deload now, follow me on Instagram, drop me a message, and I'm more than happy to help. So when do you deload? A rough rule of thumb here is sort of 8 to 12 weeks for a bodybuilder or someone who's training with the general goal of just getting bigger or just getting a little bit bigger and stronger. If you're training more sort of as a powerlifter, and although I actually don't think that these two are far different, the general rule of thumb for powerlifting seems to be more at sort of 4 to 6, maybe to 8 weeks. The conjugate method being a perfect example, sort of 3 on 1 off. And that's okay, but I'm hesitant of sort of, are we then tapping into a deload too frequently to the point where actually we're taking one step back, but instead of then taking 4 forward, we only get to take 1.5 to 2 steps forward. And so, although the deload has its purposes, are we then limiting progression because of how short the sort of training cycle is in between? Potentially. So let's take 8 to 12 weeks for example. Do we then just say, right, so every 10 weeks I'm going to add a deload, no questions asked. So week 9, right, I need to deload next week, or week 1, right, I've got 9 weeks left. That necessarily should not necessarily be the case. Um, I would rather you auto-regulate this. I'm messing my words up here. Um, and so assess. Okay, do I feel good? Do I not feel so good, or am I fried and need a deload? And sort of auto-regulate based on that. So if you feel as though you're okay, but your deload's meant to be next week, you're performing well, you're progressing, and things are moving really well, I would argue, okay, do you not want to push that a few more weeks first and take the deload when it's more suited? On the flip side, if you've got 4 programmed weeks left until your deload, but you are not progressing, you're struggling to sleep, you've got no appetite, you're just everything's messed up, you may then think, okay, it's time for a deload here. I'm fried musculoskeletally. And so you have to auto-regulate it. Take it with a pinch of salt, because everyone's training program, nutritional setup, recovery demands, recovery capabilities, they're all so different and differ from individual to individual. And so to say that one size fits all and 8 weeks is good or 12 weeks is good really is just ignorant and lazy coaching. And you have to assess the individual, assess where they're at, and assess where they need to be in a period of time, and where that deload is best going to suit them. So in a competition prep for bodybuilding, if you are 2 weeks out, you may want to consider a deload in a different manner than if you were 10 weeks out. Equally and I'm not really going to touch too much on this because it moves out of the point of when to deload, because it's sort of more on how to structure it, but how you then might set up that deload would differ depending on the time that you put it in the plan. And we're not going to say any more on that. We'll save it for the how-to video. Be mindful that your subjective and objective views or subjective and objective assessment of sort of position is often going to be different. And so you may be fried, but your mindset of just sort of hard-working individual might say, no, I'm fine, I can keep going, like man up, train hard, and all this sort of stuff that we know never ends well. You may want to include that to the considerations for when to deload, because after a period of time we have to be sensible and say, look, we've trained for 24 weeks now, we need to deload, because you can run as long of a block as you want, but eventually you're going to reach a point of diminishing return. And so if you haven't had the mental or physical cue to say, look, we need to deload, eventually you're going to have to just sort of say, okay, it's time. This is dependent on who you are, what you do, blah, 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 but it's something to consider. So let's apply this more to powerlifting, considering I imagine the majority of people watching this and the majority of my clients are powerlifters. So the common misconception here, I say misconception, the rule of thumb for powerlifters, it tends to be sort of reducing volume as opposed to just taking time off. And that's okay, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I would consider asking yourself why. Because if we was to say that you're in an off season, or you're in a strength block, or you're just trying to progress, and you take a week deload, but you just cut the load in half, so you work with, or cut the volume in half, so you work with 50% volume. Why would you do that? Is that going to contribute to your progression? Not really. Is it going to allow you to mitigate as much fatigue as if you did no training? No. So if the goal of a deload is to mitigate fatigue, why would you hinder that ability to mitigate that by still going into the gym and training? Just take a week off. Are you going to regress in a week? No, not at all. So pull back, actually take the time off, actually adhere to the goal of the week to mitigate fatigue, recover, regroup, and go again. Don't go doing all these weird sort of, reduce volume, reduce intensity, because it is literally just junk volume that's just going to take away from the goal of the week. So of course this is again dependent. You may find that actually you respond better to going in and continuing to tap through the motor pathways and training at 30% or whatever it is. I personally think that I would rather see my clients take time off completely. Can we tie this in with a meet? I'd argue yes. So if you're 3 weeks out from a meet, you may say, okay, actually we've got the meet on the Sunday, so from 7 days out, we're not going to train. Or if you are going good into the meet, you can then maybe say, okay, we only take 3 days off prior to the competition, and post-competition, we then allow for a 10-day deload period. or a 7-day rest week completely. The overall take home for this video of when to deload is just sort of auto-regulate and self-assess. Don't go by what the fitness influencer or textbook says, because it has no consideration of you as an individual. If I was watching Steve on YouTube, Steve is applying what he knows in terms of himself and his clients, not you. So you need to take what Steve says, take what the books say, take what I say, put it all together and cross-reference that with how you feel, and that's when you should deload. Obviously everything's individual, but look for the cues. Am I feeling good? Am I not? If you are, you're probably okay to continue. If you're not, you need to deload. If you require any support with knowing when you need to deload, how to structure that deload, or anything else regarding deload, or anything else for that matter, then this is all covered within my ebooks. I have ebooks which go into an abundance of details on every variable underneath the 3 headings of training, nutrition and recovery. And you can access these ebooks by swiping up to the top of the screen, heading over to the shop page, and then going on to ebooks, and you will see these there. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you have any sort of recommendations or suggestions on what you would like to see me cover in this section, please drop them to the Instagram, which is once again on the screen. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.